Hi, and welcome to the Mid-Level Exceptional Sport Business Podcast. My name is Joe Easy. I'm your host. This is my opportunity to talk with people within our sport industry who are moving our business forward. Today, I'm joined by Michael Peterson, or Coach Mike, founder and CEO of the Imagination Project. It's a program, a nonprofit that builds bridges for underserved, under-recruited youth within sports, science, and tech. Mike, thank you so much for joining me here this afternoon.
Hey, Joe. Thanks for asking me to be here. I'm excited. I've been listening, so I love the podcast.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for the feedback. This is episode 10 of our podcast, so it's definitely a milestone, and I'm excited to be able to have you on for episode 10. You'll be the first representative of a nonprofit on the podcast.
Let's go.
So let's get into it. So as you know, I really like to let folks tell their own stories. So before we get into your background, when we first got into contact, it was about a program that you're running called Kicks Academy.
Sure.
But if you could spend some time talking about both Kicks Academy and also the Imagination Project and what you are trying to accomplish with each of those.
Sure. So the interesting part is that the Imagination Project has been around for quite some time. I kind of use it as like I kind of say like we're a shadow organization that does really cool stuff around the world. But doing that cool stuff led me to meet, a few, fathers and New Yorkers that were interested in sneaker culture and building out programming for students when it comes to, teach them industrial design and really learning about just what the sneaker industry has in store for a child who might really be into sneakers, but might come from a very rough neighborhood and not have access, to go to, SneakerCon or any of these major conferences. And so Kicks Academy was really birthed from the shadow work that the Imagination Project was doing with Nike and a few other brands, and then meeting just very interested people that wanted to kind of bring it into the fold of young people's lives. And so one kind of built off of the other. And so when we had spoken and when we got in touch, it was to kind of like look at what does the MBA and organizations within the MBA, the different roles and spaces that you can fill while you're, at work. And this whole idea of the future of work is really steeped in being able to be agile and understand the different spaces that you can exist in order to be successful. And so that's kind of what both of those things are, right? The Imagination Project is literally powered by the imagination. It's the shadow that has done tons of work, and then Kicks Academy kind of birthed out of that alongside some other individuals that really were excited and spearheaded, were spearheading things already under the Kick and Knowledge nonprofit.
So no, the Imagination Project is really your initial one. So tell us a little bit more about how that came about, how you started that, and then leading into a little bit more overall about your backstory.
Sure. So I used to own a brand and store and a marketing shop called Yume, which means dream or famous in Japanese. And it was based in Crown Heights, Brooklyn. And it was this amalgamation of creative technologies, creative individuals, and people who were building culture at a high level and subculturally all at the same time. And I initially created it because I wanted to give the opportunity to youth who were, I want to say, underinvested in, right? They were not being recruited because they were being counted out based on their high school careers, right? And so created this amazing program with this really large nonprofit called Good Shepherds, where I was able to take students that were kicked out of school or aged out of school and give them an opportunity to be employees in this space. This amazing space in Crown Heights, 3,000 square foot loft. That was an art gallery, a store that dealt in Japanese import streetwear, and heavily involved in the music and arts industries across the world, right? And so it really started with that, because it was like, well, how do you build an organization, or you build a thing that can really support that population in the most powerful way, and still give them the opportunities to exist in career and the joy of work and career that many of us kind of steep our lives in, and build out. And so that's where the shadow was created. And I really built it out kind of like I really built it out as a shadow institution, because I think it's important that we not all the time seek the spotlight when we're doing the work that's really necessary. Um, and it also allowed the students who were ultimately being shamed for not graduating high school on time, right? That's really what was happening to them and what they were going through in their lives. You know, some of them were early parents at 14 or 15 years old, and were being counted out by their families, or even how society looks at that student, right? But they were all brilliant and super creative and awesome and amazing. And so, the more I could keep them enjoying their process without having to deal with ridicule was really important for me. And that's how I've kind of continued my work, around the world in the very same way. Especially like, when you get into athletes and sports, and right, there's for every star that makes it, there's someone better who didn't make the right life choices, right? And a lot of times that really puts them in a space where they're being ridiculed and judged and hurt, and that's a lot to go through. So
Well, especially as a kid, right?
yeah,
Or anybody and going through that middle school, high school age ranges, it hits you differently. I want to touch on a phrase that you used. You under-recruited. We hear that sometimes in sports, and your mind immediately goes to the athlete and being recruited as a basketball player or a football player. But the way that you use that, I don't think you're talking about college sports recruitment. You're talking about investment and
yes,
being recruited by society and being
yeah.
paid attention to by society. I really love that analogy. Can you talk more about that, and then how the investment that you can make um, impacts the future of those students within your program?
Sure. So I mean, it really does come from the sports analogy. That's where I got it from initially, right? And it was this idea of all of these wonderful friends. Like, I grew up playing basketball. All of my wonderful friends who were really super talented and under recruited, right? And then you kind of begin to look at that, and you're like, that's not just sports, that's life. Right. Like, when I was in high school, I think I went to John Dewey High School at the end of my high school career, which was a very kind of like spacey and convoluted space, right? We didn't have grades. We could come in anytime we wanted. We could leave anytime we wanted, but it was a major institution, also one of the top high schools at the time in New York City. And, that freedom will shift any child's life if it's too much, right? And so I barely graduated high school, and I was kind of counted out and under recruited in spaces, right? Especially in like colleges and universities, somehow, some way, I found myself being accepted to schools, but no one was hunting for me because I didn't have an all A average and life figured out at 17 years old, which is absolutely ridiculous, right? And so what you have is that on top of, you know, communities that are oppressed, that are marginalized, historically, right? And historically, that these populations are just under recruited globally. It's not just here in the States, but with the work that I've done in South America, on the continent of Africa, in Europe, right? I mean, like, if you go to Poland, there are, and you're in Poland and you're in one of these, there's tons of unrecruited youth, right? Poland has one of the lowest youth to work populations in the world, right? And so does Barcelona. So does Barcelona. Between the ages of 17 to 25, the unemployment rate is 87%. So why is it that we are not making the investment in our youth when they are our future? And so the idea of building out kind of what the Imagination Project does and what it continues to do, and what it will continue to do, is how do we engage youth impactfully, right? Motivationally, inspirationally, sharing knowledge, and educationally, to be able to get them engaged in building not just careers, but also entrepreneurial endeavors, right? Life lessons, life skills. So understanding the value of making your bed is also understanding the value of fixing a spreadsheet, right? Or doing a spreadsheet. Like, these things are important and very, very powerful. And you see that investment in sports. That investment is made, right? So for instance, my soccer team just competed in a citywide tournament this past Saturday, right? And so, yeah, we're pushing, right? We're on that court, right? We play, everyone's excited. Yeah, yeah. Right. We have to do the same thing in the classroom, and we have to do the same thing in career technical education. It's really, really important. And so that's where we live. That's the space we live in that work.
So you touched on and alluded to working overseas, working in Europe and Poland and Barcelona. Um, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. How did that come about? How did you go from working, focusing on a space in New York to branching out all across the world to all these different communities?
Well, it happened kind of with my personal travel, right? So as I would go places, for me, it's always important to be where the local community is, right? And then in that local community, if you have a very good discerning eye, you begin to realize that there are similarities in a lot of the challenges across the world, right? Especially if I've always loved working with kids. I've been working with youth since I was a youth myself, right? My first job, 15 years old, 16 years old. I worked at the Salvation Army in Harlem, doing homework help and teaching kids, soft skills and sports, right? And so, you know, for me, I want to go to the basketball court that everybody is at, right? Like, what's happening in London, right? Am I in Brixton? Where am I going in Paris, right? Like, what's happening? And so you also begin to see, wow, there's a gap here. There's something happening here that maybe needs to be shifted. There's a mindset that exists, but when it happens in every single place you go, and you have lived your life to build a solution, then you want to kind of share not the overall solution, but more so like the steps or the nuances to some of the solution that might work in Brooklyn. So for instance, I did a huge project in Cape Town, South Africa, in this township called Mitchell's Plain. And the idea was like, how could you use music and technology to build a connection to getting into the creative technologies as a job or as a career. And so when you're talking to the students and they're like, I love J. Cole, I love Kendrick Lamar, right? And then you did the same project in Brownsville, Brooklyn, 2 months prior to, and it's the same conversation. Then you realize, like, man, youth culture, which it always has been, it rules the world. And everything that's created and innovated starts in those spaces. And we have to kind of meet them where they are and really begin to build that out. And that's the utilization of all connects, right? Sports is ginormous, right? There is no question that it is something that literally unifies the world in every single way, right? So, if I play, soccer or football, depending on the world, how they call it, and we're able to kind of talk and connect with that, music is then connected to that, because then what are you listening to while you're training, right? And so really that's how it happened, right? Visit the places, be where the people are, be where the youth are, and then begin to look at solutions for each individual space based on the work that I was doing prior to. And that's, YMCA, Boys and Girls Club. Like I've been around. I've been a director of many of these programs before kind of going out on my own. And even sometimes I would double, right? I would double dip, when you run in the shadow, you can do that, which is awesome because if you're too far disconnected from a lot of the strategies that larger organizations are using, then you're not really able to create that micro change, And so in Mitchell's Plain in Cape Town, we built a DJ and tech lab around, software and hardware integration, right? So what does it look like to build out the next Serato while learning how to use Serato? And so that's how it's happened.
I love the way that your mind works and how you build in all of these different connections between passions and passion projects and interests, and then learning opportunities and skill buildings, one to the next, to the next, to the next. Again, when you first reached out to me, you were talking to me about this science-based, STEM-based program with the design elements to it. Like I'm a sales guy, ticket sales. That's a little bit outside of my wheelhouse, but the way that you explained the connection and how I could help and benefit your students through that process, it made a ton of sense. And in my time talking to I want to say kids within your program, I mean, the passion just jumped out to me.
Yeah. And you were super impactful, and that's something that's really important to me, right? My belief is that everyone has an educator in them. They just have to be willing to share the thing that they're passionate about, right? And so, like, not only do we know honestly and truthfully that sales rules the world, right? Like it is a skill and it is a pathway that is extremely viable in industry. We know that there are those students that are naturally charismatic, naturally able to have these conversations, naturally able to kind of appeal to a person's understanding of a thing and what value that thing or experience might be for them. And so you saw it with the questions they asked and just how they jumped out and leaped out. And I'm sure it was like, hold up. I didn't think that they would actually be into this. And that's really the bigger part of the work that I do. That's why I also love to make it like this shadowy thing, because it's like, I'm going to get you became the professor, you became the teacher, you became the educator. And now you're like, hold up, I can do this. And that's, believe it or not, inspiring the adults to inspire the youth is the key.
I love that. So you're working with youth, and you're working with youth who have been underinvested in, and you're working with them to inspire them to utilize their passions to get them to essentially invest in themselves, right? Yeah. Put in the work where nobody else has been willing to invest in them, but to invest in themselves. Yeah. Once they move out of a program like yours, how do you set them up to ensure that they're continuing to invest in themselves?
Sure. So there is no closed loop in this work, right? For some participants, maybe, but for the most part, I would say I'm still in touch with every kid I've worked with from the beginning of my career, right? And it's important, right? That mentorship, but also to creating the access for execution, right? We're not creating the access for you to ask for everything and anything. The whole point is to execute on what you learn and keep building your skills, keep building your knowledge, keep going after education. And that's something that we as adults know we need support and mentorship in, right? So it's, even if it's pairing them with someone outside of myself, getting them into institutions that can fully support them, whether it be, trade or collegiate or whatever it might be for them. Sometimes it's even an organization. There's a young man, he's not that young anymore, and I don't want to date or age myself, but like, met him in his late teens, and got him a job at the YMCA. He's still there, but that's also an educational facility, right? Imagine all of the training, and I know because I was in it, I worked there, right? Like all of the trainings, all of the interactions, all of the opportunities, all of the things that you're doing. You know, when I worked at the Y, I was 19 years old, and I piloted a graphic design program when Quark Express existed in Harlem, right? So like, imagine that. Imagine being given that opportunity and then supported with all of the trainings necessary for you to execute that project. Like we were using gateway desktop computers, you know, like this is how far back this goes, right? And so it's the same investment you make in an athlete, right? We know that recruitment starts in basketball at the age of 5, you know, right? Like they were looking at Giannis from the age of 9 years old, right? So imagine if we, once again, like we looked at that under recruited class and we said, hey, let's invest. All right, he's 9 and maybe he doesn't have the highest reading scores, but we should invest. Maybe she doesn't have the highest math scores, but maybe we should invest, right? Let's not under recruit, let's over recruit so that we can build better humans and thus build a better world.
I was going to say a better society, but exactly.
Yeah.
So this is a question that I like to ask most of the folks on my podcast. I think you'll have a very unique perspective on this. Mike, what does success look like to you?
Success for me, individually, is actually steeped in happiness based on mission, right? So at the end of days, when I lay it all down and I transition to, you know, the multiverse somehow, some way, I want to know that I was mission driven, but I was happy in my mission. Like I enjoyed and lived throughout it. And that's the ups, downs, the ins, outs, the bad, the good. And that's what it looks like. From a career perspective, it's being able to build something that ultimately I can pass to my children so they can continue that mission. And then for them to build communities that focus around the similar work. I am my parents' success, right? Like my parents worked very hard to make sure that I was able to do the work that I'm able to do, right? So my father was not only about me being a great entrepreneur and a great businessman, he was very focused on it is your responsibility to build a better world for humans. And my mother, the very same thing. My grandmother, the very same thing. You know, the investment that was made into me was really, and also too my cousins and my brothers, like this is not just kind of like a singular thing. It was very important that you know, we build a better world, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, the atrocities, you know, that took place, you know, for, you know, enslavement and just post-slavery and just, you know, all the consistency and the death and the murder and, you know, of the whole goal in our existence should be like, how do we not repeat a terrible past, right? And in turn, we have to be extremely focused on building better humans, which means we have to build better humans when we have children, right? So it's a cycle. So that's, you know, that's my view.
So carrying on from that view and applying it forward to, I think, the majority of my audience are people who are either in or looking to get into the sport industry. What would your advice be as somebody who leads a nonprofit be to people in our industry? How could we make the most impact, whether it's a nonprofit like yours or others, both as teams and organizations, and then also as individuals?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a duality. You know, one of the things that I haven't talked about is, you know, the nonprofits that also raised me, right? The AAU organizations, the playing in the junior Knicks at the YMCA, like these organizations are pivotal in building character, perseverance, and resilience in young men and women across the world, right? And so I think that's something that's really important if you're in the sports industry, especially if you're connected to a major league or sport. You should be volunteering in those spaces and really lending yourself to being a part of that process, you know, of building, you know, that next young athlete. We're all athletes. That is the key. That is a true belief, right? And so like understanding that the value system that comes, within basketball or football or it's the same value system that child is going to grow up in, whether they play pro or not. They're going to exist in that throughout their entire time. And so I think if we, treated it as such, and we volunteered and we got involved in those spaces, it could be truly something special. And on the other end, when you see something like the Imagination Project, and, Joe, you alluded to this, like, how could I be impactful in these spaces? Really, all you did was say yes. And that's all it takes. Say yes. Someone asks and you feel like it's a poignant ask, say yes. I will 100% give you an hour. I will 100% give you 30 minutes, it doesn't really cost anything other than time. And if you want to donate, then you always donate, that's fine. That works. But I think the access to your brain is so much more valuable than the access to your dollar.
I really like that. I think that, I've always been more about influence, right? If you can influence one person,
Yeah.
and that person influences one person, and
Yeah.
that person influences one person, the impact that you can have, like, you can't track it.
Yeah. It's insurmountable. It's like it's something, you'll end up affecting. And I've seen this throughout my life, like, who you are precedes you in many ways. And the reason I'm also able to do a lot of the work I'm able to do around the world is because of, that one team that I coached in basketball, Shellbank Junior High School, where we played in the most elite tournament, and it was a group of kids that had never played before. But when someone sees you coach the way you do, and they see you invest in those children the way you do, it word travels, and they see, hey, he does that in sports, but he does it in math. He does it in financial literacy. He does it in tech. Like, that's what he's about. That's what Coach Mike is about: wellness, happiness, health. And that's just, it's the way it should be.
Yeah. One last question for you here, Mike, before we get to wrapping it up. I'm going to empower you and put you at the top of the entire sport industry, not just the community impact portion of it, not just the NBA, not just one particular team or organization, but the global sport industry.
Sure.
With that, you get a magic wand where you can make any one change, and that change happens overnight, immediately. What change are you making?
I want to see more data-driven trauma healing for athletes. Athletes go through a lot from the ages of 3 years old all the way through their journey to be these warriors that we see. But they also have families. A lot of them have stories. They have things that happen in their world. And I would love to see more investment in helping them deal with their trauma, helping them heal from their trauma, and then helping them tell that healing journey so that mentally they could be happier, healthier, more enjoyable humans to the world, and in turn affect the youth that look up to them. That's one of the biggest things I would love to see.
Now, when you talk about trauma, you're not just talking about physical trauma and the toll these sports take on their body.
I'm talking about both mental and physical, right? So we know that the physical, no one talks about it, right? Say you had a bad coach at 6 years old, you jammed your finger, but really you have a fractured thumb, right? And no one ever looked at it, right? So that's one, that's the physical trauma. But then also two, in maybe that coach's practices, maybe he cursed at you. Maybe you saw him do something that was unscrupulous. Maybe something was happening at home. Maybe something happened at school. Maybe something happened with a friend. And so we tend to ask our athletes to shut off their existence, period, and just play the game. And that is not enough for them to exist as happy, healthy human beings. It's impossible. And we need to make that investment in, making sure that they are happy and healthy. And I'll share a story. Ben Simmons came by my field day to hang out with my students. And I saw the biggest demonstration of just pure empathy and care from like 7, 8, 9-year-olds, right? Because we hear about everything in the newspaper, all right, his back. And the first thing they asked, are you okay? Can I help you? That's what we need to ask our athletes. We need to say, are you okay? How can I help you? Not, here's 80 million, get on the field, get on the court, and that's it. I think it's important, especially since they're so, they they're in the media, they're media facing all the time.
Yeah.
And we seeing, these, it's really, really important. And I think Michael Beasley, I think he said it on a recent like podcast or video. I think I watched him talk about like his struggles and how he was struggling for such a long. No one cares. We have to care about our athletes. That's what I would do at the top.
It's the flip side of the celebritization of the athlete is that, you see them perform these incredible things, these godlike feats, right?
Yeah.
And they become such status symbols.
Yeah.
And you forget that they're people, right?
Yeah.
And at all levels of sport, right? Whether it's NBA or college basketball or high school basketball,
Yeah.
you have high school quarterback, king of the school. You have no idea what that person might be going through.
No, and we see it in all the movies, right?
Yes.
We see it in Friday Night Lights, and we see it in all the movies, right? Dad was an alcoholic, or right, or my girlfriend is, or something as simple as like, I don't feel like I'm enough. These are all super powerful, important things and conversations that 7-year-olds are also having in their own minds as well. A lot of my master's work was steeped in kind of identity formation and how we form self. And I think it's one of the most important things. And it's funny enough, like my master's is focused around behavioral science and kinesiology, right? So like sports and where that's at. And we know that sometimes that athlete can just identify themselves as an athlete, right? They build this wall and there's nothing that penetrates it. But inside that box that they're in, they know and they see themselves and they reflect themselves, and they know that they don't feel enough,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't feel loved, or right, all of these things. And I think we're just in an era, especially in the midst of this pandemic, like let's really invest in our humans that are doing inhuman feats.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I think you're seeing that become at least more talked about. It's coming out of the Olympics with I want to say it was Simone Biles who
Yeah,
pulled out of the Olympics because of just mental health purposes, and you have Naomi Osaka who same kind of thing. So you're hearing it become more and more, seeing at least athletes are standing up for themselves and bringing it up more frequently. Now, whether that is accepted or not accepted by people in the media, but the more you hear people talk about it, the more it's just going to become the norm.
Yeah.
And it's, well, you get paid $80 million. Who cares if you feel nervous? That is not an acceptable excuse.
Yeah, especially when the science behind what nervousness does to your body,
mm-hmm.
to your mental, chemically does to your body, right? Like, just as well as we hear about all of the unscrupulous things that they indulge in, right? But that's all just getting that dopamine hit, right? And why that's necessary for them to function. It's the same reason why when you eat a cheeseburger, you feel really good. So yeah, like let's invest in our athletes and our under-recruited and make a better world.
I love it. Mike, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. I mentioned this to you before we started recording the episode. When I Googled the Imagination Project, I did not come across anything that I think was related to you. So how can folks find you? I know you said it's a shadow organization, but folks are looking for you.
We're like Cobra. Just hit me up on LinkedIn. I am Michael Peterson. I think it's the best way to engage with me at this point. And it's one of the easiest places to find me. And then, there's sprinkles of my work everywhere. So that's the beautiful part about it. And once you engage me and you have a conversation, you'll be like, wow, you did that? I'll be like, yes. You know? Yes, we did. As I rub my cat and they purr.
Cobra Commander. Thank you, Coach Mike, Cobra Commander, whatever name you want to go by here, for joining me this afternoon. Thank you, everybody else who is listening, for taking the time to listen to this conversation. Hope you listen and stay connected for future episodes. Like, rate, review, and subscribe wherever you happen to be listening to this. And if you know anybody who is exceptional in our industry, like Mike, please send them my way. Would love to have the opportunity to have a conversation with them on a future episode. Enjoy the rest of your day.